All right, good morning. This is the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. It is the 26th of February, Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. We will start with a roll call.
Commissioner Ackerman,
Here.
Commissioner Cross,
Present.
Commissioner Mesner,
Here.
Commissioner Oath,
Here.
Commissioner Ray,
Here.
Commissioner Robbins. Mr. Chair, you have 6 commissioners present.
Great. Welcome, everyone. We have one item on or a couple items, consent agenda, and then commissioner comments, and then one docketed item. We start with commissioner comments. Comments from commissioners. All right, seeing none, moving to consent. Any questions on consent? Do we have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We next move to our docket, an important docket, the high priority habitat maps rulemaking, docket 241200329. I believe we're going to start with a presentation from Mr. McGee from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Good morning, Chair Robbins. Thank you. Just give me a second to get my PowerPoint up here. Let's see. Can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can. Looks good.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Robbins, Commissioners, Director Murphy, Assistant Director Ray. Thanks everyone for taking the time this morning to discuss CPW's proposed high priority habitat map changes for 2025 rulemaking. My name is Brian McGee. I am the Southwest Energy Liaison for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, based in Durango in the San Juan Basin. I've worked for CPW and with ECMC for almost 16 years doing oil and gas permitting. Before we get going, I just want to recognize all the hard work from CPW and ECMC staff. There's a tremendous amount of work across both of our agencies to prepare for map updates, get those distributed to stakeholders, and prepare for rulemaking. So thanks to all who have helped us get us here today. The intent is to cover CPW's process for determining map updates to the high priority habitat maps, provide an overview of the proposed map changes, and answer any questions that you may have as you consider adopting these proposed changes into the ECMC regulations. This is the 4th consecutive year that CPW has proposed annual updates to the high priority habitat maps since mission change rulemaking. We do this so that the maps represent the best available science to help us achieve our collective missions. ECMC have learned a lot about how to improve the rulemaking process over the years. And last year, ECMC and CPW instituted some significant process improvements to help with stakeholder engagement for the rulemaking process. We followed a similar approach this year by adding stakeholder review period prior to notice of rulemaking. There was an opportunity for parties to provide feedback on the draft maps. We held an ECMC stakeholder meeting. CPW conducted early stakeholder engagement meetings to preview the proposed changes within specific area of interests with specific stakeholders. We also prepared a written summary of the major changes that was included in the rulemaking folder. The proposed maps were posted on ECMC's COGIS. The map layers were also available for download in GIS shapefile and KMZ formats. During those early stakeholder outreach meetings, a suggestion was made to make viewing the map changes more accessible, and we appreciated that suggestion, and so we acted on it. Consequently, CPW staff created a side-by-side map comparison tool to aid in the exploration of the map changes. Let's go this way. Here's a screenshot of that tool that we developed. On the right-hand side is an excerpt of the current 2024 ECMC adopted elk winter concentration area around Durango in the San Juan Basin. on the left panel is the proposed 2025 changes that you're considering today. You'll see that in this instance, CPW is proposing to remove some acreage in that red circle. The other polygons in the elk winter concentration area didn't really change, and that this tool we felt really helped articulate and view those change and have stakeholders view those changes. All the ECMC HPH layers were incorporated into this tool statewide, and so stakeholders had an opportunity to review their area of interest for any proposed changes to the species maps. We received a lot of positive feedback on this tool from stakeholders, and we heard it made it easier and more accessible to review the proposed changes. For some, we're likely to continue this tool in the future, and I think this is a good example of being responsive to stakeholder feedback on how to improve the process, communication, and engagement throughout rulemaking. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the timeline to get us here today. Keep in mind that the changes that CPW made for many of the layers, especially the big game layers, represent changes over the last 5 years, because we do SAM updates in each region every 4 years, but we still have this COVID year where we missed a year, so it's 5 years. And I'll get into some more details on that in a moment. But CPW Southwest region started our SAM map updates in June of 24 and finished with the last area in September. It's a big lift to get our GIS folks to get all the layers finalized for the fall. This is particularly true for raptor nests and lek data, where annual survey data must be entered and then reflected in the geospatial data. One other aspect that's unique about the Southwest is that we are neighbors with the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute peoples and their lands. CPW has a great working relationship with the tribes. We work particularly close with the tribal wildlife departments. Wildlife don't recognize jurisdictional boundaries, and so wildlife is a shared resource between the state and the tribes. Consequently, we collaborate with the tribes on wildlife management. We have partnered on deer and elk collaring studies, habitat improvement projects, on migration studies. We have jointly funded wildlife highway crossing. We share raptor nest data and information. In addition, the Southern Ute tribe has done some significant threatened and endangered species inventory on tribal lands. And because there are lands within the San Juan Basin that are intermingled between fee and tribal land parcels, I often consult with the tribal biologist to make sure that my assessment of permit-specific wildlife has the best available information with respect to what the tribe knows about T&E species use in the area. CPW and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe, we currently have an ongoing mountain lion density study. We also have a deer and elk movement study and migration study where we're collaring deer and elk. The data and information that have been collected in collaboration with the tribes has been utilized to inform the HPH maps. And we continue to explore additional opportunities for collaboration with the tribes on wildlife management and mapping. We also did targeted early stakeholder outreach in November and December of 2024 with individual stakeholders. In addition to meeting with the Southern Ute Mountain Ute biologists, there were 7 other stakeholders or stakeholder groups that took us up on our offer to meet and preview their areas of interest and talk through the proposed changes to the maps. ECMC hosted a sort of a formal stakeholder outreach meeting in mid-December where I presented a lot of this same information that we're going to go through today. At that time, ECMC also opened a Google comment form prior to notice to take in any data or comments prior to notice, and we did not receive any comments through that portal. So let me just talk a little bit about the SAM updates, because every year we get questions on how CPW develops these maps. So I wanted to cover the methodology and the expected utilization of our CPW species activity mapping and how it relates to high priority habitat maps, and ultimately, what the interface with high priority habitat maps and ECMC regulations are. CPW SAM maps encompass a broad range of species habitats and information. The SAM maps reflect the best available science in the distribution and spatial use of species. CPD's wildlife management, including our land use commenting, federal planning process, and planning processes utilize these maps. These maps are available to the public, academia, industry, developers, NGOs, land trusts, counties, consultants in all sectors who use them for a variety of purposes in land use planning and permitting, land management, and conservation planning. ECMC's adoption and use of the high priority habitat maps for oil and gas regulation are just one example of their use. The map database includes approximately 175 data layers mapped by CPW that are publicly available. CPW's SAM map process has been in place for nearly 30 years, and while the technology has improved our ability to synthesize data, the general methodology has remained constant. In order to maintain up-to-date information at a biologically significant and logistically implementable timeframe, CPW conducts SAM mapping in one region annually, which means that each region is updated every 4 years, and that regional rotation is counterclockwise around the state. Some layers, like raptor nests and lek locations, are updated annually statewide. If you recall, last year, it was the Northwest region's turn for map updates, and in calendar year 24, SAM mapping occurred in the Southwest region. During these SAM mapping sessions, the GIS staff works with our district wildlife managers, our area biologists, and other local staff. We pull up the definitions for each layer, and they are reviewed as we work through the list of data layers and make revisions as necessary. The existing maps are displayed and then overlaid with aerial photos and maps to look at the underlying landscape and potential changes. For big game, we review flight data from annual aerial surveys, collar data if it's available. We incorporate ground observations from field staff. We may also have research data available to CPW or submitted data from organizations. We do have some reciprocal data agreements associated with scientific collection permits, and CPW may receive aquatic data from researchers and consultants. Bat data comes from scientific collection permits, as well as a cooperative program of NABAT. What's important to understand is that decades of information are captured in these maps: ground observations, information shared by wildlife watchers, landowners, hunters, flight survey data, collar data, research data, if available, habitat and vegetation changes, fire. They're all summarized with the professional knowledge of our DWMs, area wildlife managers, local biologists, and GIS staff. As I mentioned, the SAM data is publicly available from CPW GIS links on our website. There's a CPW ArcGIS library, as well as maps available for Google Earth. There are also maps available at all of our offices with contact information if you have questions or other information to share with CPW staff. An applicable subset of data that high priority habitats are taken from SAM. Other sources that become our high priority habitats include our raptor nest, grouse, prairie chicken, lek, aquatic, and bat databases. High priority habitat maps are those layers that are sensitive habitats for which CPW has sound geospatial data and scientifically backed recommendations. ECMC has adopted the high priority habitat into their regulations, and the high priority habitats act as a trigger for operator consultation with CPW. I'd like to point out that CPW staff does not map differently based on whether something is high priority habitat or not, or whether that layer is used in a regulatory context, Rather, the layers represent the best available science with a combination of empirical data and expert opinion and knowledge to derive the map layer. Really, the origin of the CPW's high priority habitat list was born out of rulemaking for House Bill 1298 way back in 2008. But it's also informed CPW's engagement with federal land planning efforts in Colorado. Utilized by CPW while as a cooperating agency during federal BLM and Forest Service planning efforts. We've used that since at least 2010. CPW is a recommending agency for energy and land use reviews, and the high priority habitat table is the basis for CPW reviews of wildlife impacts with developers, utilities, other state agencies, as well as counties, local municipalities. It's also intended to support statewide consistency in CPW's commenting, as well as ensure CPW recommendations are based on the best available science. And so again, the habitats on the high priority habitat list, and those of which you've incorporated into your regulations, are where CPW has geographic distributions for the species, as well as scientific support that the species are affected by disturbance and development, and that we have reliable information supporting the recommendations to avoid, minimize, and mitigate those impacts. Let's talk a little bit about some of the data sources behind these layers. CPW is responsible for perpetuating the state's wildlife resources. And given that responsibility, we're leaders in the collection of biological data for management and conservation. Data collected by CPW is not collected for the sole purpose of map development. Data is collected to answer numerous management questions such as population trends, to understand habitat conditions, to delineate critical habitats, to inform animal distributions, to be responsive to federal listing proposals under the Endangered Species Act, and for species conservation planning. Data layers inform professional judgment and are relied upon during map updates. And with respect to big game, data sources such as flight or collar data are not defining the map polygons. Rather, it's the expertise of the local staff that ultimately determine the shape and size of a polygon. One important aspect of our SAM maps is that they reflect wildlife data while protecting critical species location data. CPW data collection for big game herds includes a long list of storage and collection methods. One of those is GPS collar data. We use GPS collar data during our SAM updates as raw data that's not publicly developed, is not publicly available to inform the polygons. Depending on the species, we conduct pre and post hunt sex and age ratios surveys for each DAU, primarily based on classification and aerial classification, ground classification flights, depending on the species. We used harvest estimates determined by stratified random telephone and internet surveys of licensed hunters. We estimate survival rates that include all sources of mortality based on annual collar studies. We conduct population estimates derived from spreadsheet models and methods that are based on the best available science published in the literature. CPW has a roadkill app where field staff mark roadkill data for species and location that we can use to make these maps. Some observational data is not collected in a database, but may be collected by a DWM or a biologist and with specific mapping software or just their general field notes. CPW's methodology for data collection is based on decades of experience, and the methods and types are verified through scientific literature and analysis based on the best available science. Data collection timeframes, depending on the species, whether it's winter breeding season, are generally standardized to best understand changes over time. We're constantly striving to acquire and implement the best available data and methodology for data collection. And all the available data that I've talked about is reference data for our understanding of wildlife management. which includes making maps. So that's the background of the SAM process. And like the purpose of today is that ECMC Commission has adopted certain CPW high priority habitat layers for oil and gas regulation. And for ECMC to update those maps, we must go through a rulemaking process. So what's on your screen today, right now, is the proposed 1202D habitat layers. This is a combined layer of all the high priority habitats listed under your regulations in 1202D. The green is existing or no change. The black is proposed to be removed. The red are additions. One thing to note is that the individual layers may have a combination of addition and subtraction and may overlap with other species. So, for instance, elk and mule deer winter concentration areas may overlap, and what you're really seeing is the overlap of all the layers if it's green. Nevertheless, these polygons represent the high priority habitat that are consultation triggers with CPW under the ECMC regs. And as you can see, the bulk of the changes are in the Southwest region. There are some changes in other areas of the state, and most of those are based on LEC status changes. However, I just want to point out that there's no proposed changes for lesser prairie chicken focal area or greater sage grouse priority habitat management area under these maps. The other grouse and prairie chicken species production areas are covered under 1202D are LEC status-based buffers. So if there's a LEC, then there is a buffer associated with that LEC that falls under your 1202D habitat. And I'll show you the LEC changes in another slide or two. Looking at some of the statistics here. So the 1202D layers are dominated by big game winter range migration corridors and the grouse and prairie chicken production areas that are mostly associated with LECs. So you can see the big game, severe winter range and winter concentration area changes on the maps. I don't have listed is elk production area did increase by about 11%. And that is based on the addition of 750 adult GPS collars that we deployed over the last 5 years. And then the bighorn sheep production area increased about 4% overall. In the last several years, CPW has invested considerable resources into analyzing big game migration corridors and migration pinch points across the state. As discussed during the 2024 wildlife map rulemaking and further expounded upon with CPW's presentation to this commission in February of 23, we conducted a migration corridor analysis of all of our collar data. We aggregated our big game GPS collar data across the state and conducted a Brownian bridge movement model. A Brownian bridge movement model estimates the expected movement path between discrete locations or points. It uses time between location and distance between location and the mobility or speed of movement between the locations. The Brownian bridge movement model produces a heat map, and the concentration areas or hotspots vary in number based on the individuals and the number of migrating animals and the distribution of the captured and collared individual animals. We conducted our initial analysis at the DAU level, combining all the collared animal migrations. For 2024, the migration corridors generated from the Brownian bridge movement model based on GPS collar data were overlaid with CPW's deer and elk SAM migration corridor data for staff to review and edit. This hybrid approach combines the best available information to create comprehensive statewide migration corridor layer for deer and elk. In 2025, or the maps that you're looking at now, CPW staff again reviewed those layers and made modifications based on professional judgment, utilizing the underlying Brownian bridge movement model. We spent a considerable amount of time doing this. So in total, we spent about 28 and a half hours of team review, going through these migration corridors and making changes, which if you break it out onto an individual staff level, it was hundreds of hours of staff time in this review. I want to talk a little bit about raptors because it's been brought up, but raptor nests are dynamic, and while there's high site fidelity, nest occupancy and activity varies year to year at nests. Nests can also become destroyed or become inactive. The breeding season for most raptors in Colorado starts around December and ends by June. Nest monitoring and searching for previously undocumented nests is how CPW determines the status of nests and where they occur each year. We also collect data on nest success and the number of chicks and fledglings. Chicks fledge typically around the end of June and sometimes into July. The bulk of our field work and data collection occurs in the spring of summer, and data is summarized in the fall by biologists, updated into the databases and the geospatial data before it's publicly released. There's a lag time between field collection, verification of data, updating the maps, and then conducting ECMC rulemaking. And while the system's imperfect because there could always be new nests or LECs for that standpoint, they do represent the best available information at a specific point in time. But it's always a breeding season behind. And that's just sort of the nature of the beast. And that's because administratively, there's a need to pick a point in time in which to amass all of this data and proceed with finalizing a layer for ECMC rulemaking. We do this as close to the new year as possible because it's a natural break between field seasons, and it's logistically achievable for our staff to get all this data together. The maps represent the best available information at a specific time, like I already said. And we're comfortable with the knowledge that ECMC maps represent that single point in time and that conditions on the ground can change and are dynamic. CPW maintains a raptor database that is opportunistically updated year-round for CPW staff internal use. And we use this database routinely for nest statuses, and we do not rely solely on ECMC maps for nests. Operators may conduct raptor nest surveys as part of their due diligence in preparing their permitting materials. And the ECMC regulations allow CPW to request a consultation with the ECMC director and an operator for any reason. And a previously undocumented raptor nest would be a very good reason to request a consultation. So even if a nest or any other wildlife resource is not on the map, CPW has the ability under your regulations to request a consultation. Conversely, operators also have an opportunity to prove a resource such as a nest no longer exists and is unlikely to return. And if CPW concurs, then your regulations may allow development to proceed. So consequently, CPW feels that there is sufficient opportunity and a clear regulatory process to work with operators and ECMC to address conditions on the ground in real time. So let's look at what happened with raptors. So these are the 1202C habitats. This is all of them, including the aquatic layers. So all of the layers that you have listed in 1202C is on this map. These are the NSO areas, which are predominantly aquatic on a statewide basis, but they also include nest and lek sites, as well as bighorn sheep production areas, bat hibernacula, state wildlife areas, and state parks. And then again, as you're looking at the map, the green is the existing or no change, red are additions, and then the black areas are removals. This slide shows a summary of the raptor nest NSOs. The text in red is decreasing in acreage. The other areas include aquatic, bighorn sheep production, bat hibernacula, state wildlife and parks, and least tern production areas. There were 5 waters that changed their classification to HPH in the Southwest region. 2 of them are in the San Luis Valley. They're associated with Rio Grande cutthroat trout stream reclamation projects that we did last summer. One in the SLV, the San Luis Valley, is managed for native species conservation water for the Rio Grande chub. That was a change. And then there are 2 lakes that are managed outside of Montrose that have, one is was converted to a cutthroat trout broodstock lake, and the other changed to a quality sport fishery. So again, here's the proposed 1202C high priority habitats. This is for the grouse and prairie chickens. The map is the same as the previous, showing all the NSO areas. Again, green is existing, no change. Red are additions. The black areas are removals. And then, I've listed the percent change of increase, decrease for LEC sites on the left-hand side of your screen. So slight increases in LEC sites, which is good. And finally, here's all the proposed high priority habitat triggers under ECMC regulations for your consideration. Green's existing, no change. Red are the additions, and the black are the removals. Overall, statewide, there's a 1.8% increase in HPH triggers. And that concludes my presentation of the proposed high priority habitat map changes for 2025. Happy to try and answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. Well done. A lot of information there. Commissioners, Mr. McGee is open for questions. Commissioner Ackerman?
Well, Mr. McGee, nice to see you. Thank you so much for your presentation. Although we hear each time how SAM mapping is done, I really appreciate you going through that, and having been through that myself, recognize that it's a significant undertaking for CPW each year, and appreciate you outlining that. Can you talk a bit more about stakeholder outreach and things that you did in order to make sure that others were informed of the process and informed of opportunities to listen to the process and to participate in the process?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we reached out to the tribes early. In fact, we actually invited Southern Ute Tribe to sit in on our SAM mapping sessions to help make the maps. But we did show them and discuss with the Ute Mountain Ute and Southern Utes our proposed changes and talked about those. They were the first ones we talked to, and then I sent out a bunch of emails to operators, primarily in the Southwest region, who would be most affected by proposed changes, and offered individual meetings with all of them. Also reached out to West Slope Koga and some of the trade organizations. And I ended up ultimately meeting with a combination of, also reached out to the NGO community, but we held 7 individual meetings and walked through various areas of interest. So the Western and Rural Local Governments Coalition, they were interested in looking at changes for their membership. We looked at those. We looked at the changes in the San Juan Basin with individual operators and with the Energy Council folks. And we met with SG and Gunnison Energy for the North Fork of the area and walked through all the changes that could potentially impact their operations. So Total, we met with individuals 7 times, or 7 organizations held 7 meetings. And then we also, ECMC hosted sort of that more big, broad, formal stakeholder outreach meeting in mid-December.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we're going to hear from some folks here in a little bit, but can you just broadly characterize how you felt those conversations went, and did you feel they were productive, and give us kind of your grading of the stakeholder process outreach this go round?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think like this communication with industry and NGOs and general stakeholders is we're improving at it. We're getting better at figuring out how best to get the information that different groups want to know about to them earlier in the process. And so I think with offering those individual meetings, it gives us the time and space to go slow and to answer any of the questions about specific changes on the maps that anybody might have. Because not everybody's interested on a statewide basis of the changes, right? Everyone usually has a specific area of interest to them, whether it's because they're local or whether because they have operations there. And so they want to know about those specific changes. And so it's just been a really great opportunity to really dig in the details on it, that individual level with those stakeholders. And so I felt like that was super positive. We got a lot of good response back, especially with that side by side map viewer that we made as just another tool for people to access the data and the changes, and just to review those changes, in a side by side panel. So I felt like it went good. Most of the feedback that we got, nobody was challenging any of the layers in terms of what we were presenting, but there's definitely a lot of interest of like why, and being able to articulate that why is useful in getting acceptance from all the stakeholders.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And finally, can you talk a little bit about the timing this year? We've had some HPH updates early in the year. We've had at least one later in the year, and just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on whether this timing process this year you felt worked well for the Southwest region, or if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the good news is that, as a commission, you guys have committed to doing HPH rulemaking on a frequent basis. Under the old regs and 1298, we didn't have that opportunity. And so consequently, the maps became less and less useful as time goes on if they're not updated. We struggle a little bit with getting all this information packaged and ready to go for rulemaking and for public digestion, just in terms of we're hustling in terms of the end of the field seasons and then getting all this data cleaned and organized and ready to display. And so, but that period, we want it to be as short as possible from when the data at that point in time represents the best available science to when the next field season starts and we start collecting more data. And so that we're really striving for that first of the year to have everything wrapped up. And so we really appreciate ECMC staff and Director Murphy being willing to try to push this rulemaking up closer to the new year so that we have the best available data for the longest period of time until we need to update it again. And so that's the goal, is that everyone has the best that we have in rulemaking, and as tight as we can get to that new year, the best.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I guess one final question spurred by that comment, which is, sometimes we have people that are advocating for maybe adoption of most of the maps that you've presented, or maybe have an issue with an item or two and would like us as a commission to adopt maybe some differentiation from what you present. I just wanted to ask you your thoughts on that, and does that present difficulties for CPW in consultation, or we've historically been hesitant to deviate as we believe that's been the best available science. But can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about wildlife, right, is that they move and they're dynamic and seasons change and they're always kind of doing whatever they're doing for their breeding and survival. And so we're just behind the time a little bit in terms of documenting all of that. But we're okay in terms of the way that your regulations work, that if something's not on the map and it's important, and that we need to interject if there is a OGDP or some permit that pops up, we feel like your regulations give us the ability to on ramp into that process and request a consultation. And we also feel like this commission has demonstrated a willingness to do so, and ECMC staff certainly have pulled us in. And so we're comfortable in, just even if there's a couple of wildlife features that aren't on this set of maps, that should any development proposal come before us, that we can appropriately consult on that location and avoid, minimize, and mitigate, give you recommendations to that extent.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. For the record, those regulations are found in rules 309 E2D and 309 E3C, and appreciate you mentioning those during your presentation today. Nothing further from me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Excellent questions. Other questions for Mr. McGee? Commissioner Oath?
Thank you. And thanks, Mr. McGee. I think we have highlighted a lot of really helpful information, particularly for me, as this is my first time through an HPH mapping rulemaking hearing. So really appreciate that. Along the lines of some of the testimony you already provided, and as well as in answering some of the questions from Commissioner Ackerman, can you talk about, so appreciating that the process and the rules allow for CPW to consult even if an area, a proposed OGDP is not within a high priority habitat. Can you talk about, from a practical matter, how you can be certain that something will come to light if there is a sensitive species within, close proximity to a proposed location?
Well, so a general high priority habitat trigger is a consultation trigger, for one species, but we'll look at everything, right? So let's say, there's an OGD proposed in pronghorn migration corridor. We would go out and not just look at for pronghorn, we're going to look at all wildlife species out there and make an assessment on that. And so, like, if raptor nests are a great example where they just pop up, and so we routinely do on-sites when we get OGDPs or permits, just to look for those things that aren't on our maps, right? Raptor nests being a key one. In addition, there are permits that come before you that do not require consultation with CPW because they're not within HPH. But CPW staff, we still look at all those permits and screen those non-consult permits against our internal data that we have, just as a gut check to make sure we don't know about anything that isn't on a map or that you guys don't know about. And so we have an internal process to screen those as well. And so, can something slip through the cracks? Absolutely. But it would be rare. And so we try to have those systems and processes in place where, whether it's the operator bringing something to our attention, which happens routinely, or we have data in one of our databases that's not publicly available, or ECMC staff or a neighbor or somebody on the ground sees something and contacts us, we will respond to that. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty good.
Great, thank you for that.
Further questions for the panel? All right. right, seeing no further questions, Mr. McGee will let you go. I hope you hang around. We've got a few other stakeholders who desire to present to us, and we may have questions for you after we hear from further stakeholders. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Commissioners, we've got about 5 or 6 parties with a few comments each. Let's take 5. It's 9:45. Let's return at 9:50, and then we will hear from the first presentation stakeholder. All right, welcome back. We are on the high priority habitat hearing docket 241200329. We will now hear from the conservation and wildlife groups.
Commissioners, my name is Tarnidal and I'm representing the conservation and wildlife groups. This rulemaking is characterized by consensus. First, each party supports the commission's deciding to adopt the amendments and additions to the HPH maps as CPW recommends. Even Broomfield confirms in its pre-file testimony that has no objection to the adoption of the updated HPH maps, except that it does request the addition of the identified bald eagle nest. And all the other parties support or do not challenge the adoption of the updated maps themselves. And this support for those CPW proposed changes is appropriate, as CPW has done since the HPH maps were first incorporated into the Commission's rules. The agency has grounded its proposed amendments and additions to the maps in methodical science and sound expertise. Mr. McGee just summarized the robust process that CPW employs to update the maps. As he mentioned, the information analysis CPW relies on to update the maps is vast and includes aerial photographs, evaluation of landscape changes and biological data, telemetry data, GPS data from collared animals, field observations, research data, data from the federal government and other entities, and agency staff expertise. And in many cases, this reflects years of effort. Then CPW staff work together to vet this information before recommending changes to the HPH maps. The vetting for this year's update included active outreach and meeting with stakeholders beginning back in November. The result is maps that fall directly in line with the Commission's definition of HPH, habitat areas identified by CPW where measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate adverse impacts to wildlife have been identified. The HPH map amendments and additions before the Commission simply depict the changes to boundaries of HPH that CPW proposes based on the agency's expertise and the best available science. The second point of agreement is that this proceeding should be limited to the only issue addressed in the notice of rulemaking, updates to the existing HPH maps. Only Energy Council, most recently in its pre-file testimony, seeks to expand the scope of the rulemaking beyond the HPH maps. If for no other reason that these subjects were not referenced in the notice of rulemaking, the Commission should decline to entertain those efforts to raise extraneous issues. So based on the consensus of the parties, CPW's expertise in science-backed recommendations, and the appropriate scope of this rulemaking, we urge the Commission to adopt the proposed amendments and additions to the HPH maps. The administrative record, the definition of HPH, and the Commission's duty to protect wildlife all support, if not compel such an outcome. Finally, we share Broomfield's concern that the bald eagle nest documented in Broomfield be protected from the recognized adverse impacts of oil and gas development. Rule 1202C1G confirms that avoiding bald eagle nests by prohibiting new ground disturbances or well work within a quarter mile of an active nest is necessary to protect the species. And based on the science behind this rule, that minimum buffer should be applicable regardless of whether the nest is on the HPH maps. And in addition, as the Commission just discussed with Mr. McGee, when the Commission finalized Rule 309E2D, it anticipated this exact scenario where eagle nests should be protected even when they are not depicted on an HPH map. According to the Commission, that rule provides CPW with an on-ramp to consult where the facts on the ground identify a wildlife resource that needs consideration. In the statement of basis and purpose for the 800, 900, and 1200 series rules, the Commission explained that such an on-ramp is appropriate when CPW is notified of an active raptor nest that does not appear on the most recent high priority habitat maps provided to the Commission. The Commission's rules therefore recognize both the need to protect bald eagle nests and provide a means for doing so, even where the HPH maps do not depict an active nest. And as Mr. McGee suggested, the existing processes seem to be working well. In this specific instance, where Broomfield and CPW have both documented the eagle nest and the commission's rules dictate how eagles' nests are to be protected, at a minimum, no oil and gas ground disturbing activity should be allowed to occur within a quarter mile of that nest. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we reserve any remaining time for rebuttal.
Thank you, Ms. Udall, for the testimony. I appreciate your being with us today. Questions for the witness? All right, seeing no questions, please stick around as we listen to other folks, and we may have questions in rebuttal. We will let you go.
Thank you, Chair.
Next, we will hear from the Garfield County and Western and Rural Local Government Coalition. Mr. Nguyen.
So I'm in transit and I'll be able to give testimony maybe after the next party, if you wouldn't mind skipping over me for the moment.
Will do. We'll get back to you, Mr. Nguyen, here in a bit. We don't have a ton of additional testimony, but let's go ahead and move to the next witness. That is someone from the city and county of Broomfield. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Thank you.
Okay, great. I need to figure out the presentation. I am not seeing where, oh, share screen, there we go. Is that presentation sharing?
It is. It's not in presentation mode, but
Okay, we'll fix that really quick.
yep, there you go.
Okay, great. Broomfield would love to thank the commission for its time and consideration, and we certainly want to thank Colorado Parks and Wildlife for its amazing work in protecting wildlife throughout Colorado. Broomfield's pre-hearing statement, along with the written testimony of Bob Woods, our open space manager, contains Broomfield's position in this rulemaking. And the ask that we're making is very narrow: to preserve the status quo and amend the draft HPH maps to recognize a single bald eagle's nesting site in Broomfield. This area is currently recognized in the 2024 high priority maps, which is Appendix 6 of the Commission's rules. Unfortunately, this wildlife area is omitted from the draft 2025 high priority habitat maps that are under consideration in this rulemaking, which will replace Appendix 7 of the Commission's rule. Based on Mr. McGee's timeline presented, the draft HPH maps were put in the Google folder, and a stakeholder meeting was held on December 19th. Broomfield did not participate in that stakeholder meeting. We were not aware that we would be impacted. The formal notice was then made on December 30th, 2024. A few days later, after the rulemaking was noticed, Broomfield reviewed the HPH maps and discovered that a bald eagle nesting site in Broomfield was omitted. Our open space manager, Bob Woods, then quickly visited the site, confirmed the presence of the bald eagles, and Broomfield contacted CPW. The district wildlife manager, Cassie Penn, came out and observed and confirmed the bald eagles nesting site on January 10th. And this map shows the area where the eagle's nest is, north of 168th Avenue between Interstate 25 and County Road 11. And this photograph is a picture of the eagles and the nesting site that was taken by Cassie Penn of CPW. That was taken in January of 2025, shortly after we reviewed and discovered that there was an active eagle nest site here. These eagles were observed and photographed. There's no dispute that this nesting area was omitted from the 2025 draft. And there's also, that's map is shown on the right. There's also no dispute that it was previously included in the maps approved in 2024, which is the map to the left. Broomfield and Colorado Parks and Wildlife are united in their recognition that this bald eagle's nest should be protected habitat. A little bit more on the timeline. On January 30th, 2025, I reached out to Brian McGee at CPW and asked that high priority habitat maps in this rulemaking be revised. Mr. McGee stated that it was too late for the nest to be included in the proposed maps. For approval in this making, he did indicate that the nest would likely be approved in the 2026 high priority habitat maps if the location persists through the 2025 breeding season. Broomfield respectfully disagrees that it should be too late to make any amendments. The current HPH maps were approved in 2024 and reflect the eagle nesting area in Broomfield. It is the status quo and shouldn't be changed to remove this habitat protection. Broomfield is asking that this area again be included in these maps and that the draft map be corrected or amended before adoption to include this area. Our ask is grounded on ECMC statutory mandate to regulate in a manner that protects wildlife and the environment. ECMC's definition of high priority habitat references protecting the areas that CPW has identified for protection of wildlife. CPW has now identified this area as a bald eagle's nesting site, and it is included in the Raptor database at this time. Broomfield disagrees with the suggestion that changes should not be made to the draft maps submitted by CPW. Nothing in your rules suggests that the draft maps submitted must be considered on a take it or leave it basis. In fact, the notice in this rulemaking states the opposite, that ECM will consider additions and amendments. The notice references the HPH maps as drafts, and drafts are generally understood to be documents that are subject to change. The purpose of this rulemaking is for the Commission to review the draft maps, which will become Appendix 7 to the rules. The Commission has full authority to amend the maps as needed to protect wildlife. In the past, the Commission has made amendments to drafts. Broomfield believes that the Commission can and should amend the maps to recognize and restore this bald eagle nesting site in Broomfield. We appreciate that CPW is able to consult on permits and applications and consider habitat that might not be included in the HPH maps. We value Rule 309E2D in that process. However, we do know that there is at least one operator who's in litigation with the Commission that has taken the position that the habitat must be on the maps. So Broomfield would be remiss if it didn't advocate in this rulemaking for this specific change to high priority habitat maps to protect this active bald eagle nesting site. We appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you for the presentation. Questions for the panel? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert, and thank you so much to Broomfield for, once again, their participation in protecting wildlife within their jurisdiction and outside of their jurisdiction. Appreciate your work as always. I do have just a couple of clarifying questions as per your testimony. It felt like you intimated that area was erroneously removed. Am I wrong? Am I mischaracterizing what you said there?
Well, I don't know the exact circumstances. My understanding, and it's based on information from Mr. McGee, was that that site was marked as destroyed and was either destroyed or partially destroyed. I don't know that to be a fact. And so that was the reason that it was marked that way, was taken off the map.
Thank you so much for that clarification. My understanding is that nests tend to remain, as Mr. McGee pointed out, for 5 years after they were last documented as active, unless and until they are actually destroyed and rebuilt. And my understanding is that's what happened here. Um, I also I thought I heard you say that ECMC does make changes to the maps that CPW presents. Can you clarify that statement? I'm unaware of us doing that since mission change.
I believe the statement I made was you make changes to rules. I am not aware that you've actually changed the maps. This is last year we were involved in the rulemaking process, but didn't see any changes that impacted Broomfield. So I am unaware of the commission actually making changes to the map. I think my statement was related to making changes to the regulations, and I would extrapolate from that you should change the maps as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification, and I apologize if I mischaracterized your statement there. Nothing further from me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Commissioner Oath?
Thank you, and thanks for being here, Ms. Gilbert. Just one follow-up on this. Like you noted, one of the reasons perhaps that from a practical standpoint of being concerned, even concerned if this area is not included in high priority habitat, being some pending litigation and arguments that are at play. But from a practical standpoint, are there reasons that Broomfield feels like the current process would not catch, this or other potential sites in this type of situation?
I think our position is that there is much more protection if this map is updated to include this nesting site. I believe that there are informal processes in place where we would be aware if there were permits that were going to impact this area. We would reach out to CPW. CPW would be responsive, but that process, as I understand it in the rules, is not necessarily mandatory. And so our concern is if the nest is on the map, that's a much sure thing to protecting this eagle's nest site than if it's excluded and we rely on the process under Rule 309. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Further questions for the witnesses? All right, would probably like to have Mr. McGee respond once we're done with regard to this testimony. But between now and then, let's move to our next panel, and that is the Colorado Oil and Gas Association.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. We've confirmed Mr. Wynn is ready to testify on behalf of Garfield County.
Oh, okay. I was going to get back to him at the end, but if Mr. Wynn is ready to go, let's hear from the Garfield County and the Western and Rural Local Government Coalition.
Good morning, Commissioners. I appreciate the accommodation while I was en route. Speaking of eagles, that's my local eagle's nest about 200 feet from my house on my view there, just for the heck of it. So WLG, we appreciate the work's been that's gone on to this. We have seen, and I wanted to specifically mention and appreciate CPW's advancements in how they've coordinated and communicated and collaborated with stakeholders in this process as each year has gone by. So each year has improved. We had great meetings with Mr. McGee and some of his staff. We were one of the parties, or probably the party, that suggested the need to have that side-by-side tool made publicly available instead of being something driven by state staff to do a demonstration of. So that really helped us out a lot, and hopefully other parties. So again, the responsiveness and the ability to have the information has been extremely helpful to us to evaluate. And in summary, what that led us to is we have no issues. We do have the WLG coalition is 15 counties, which includes Montezuma County and Delta counties, which are affected by this rulemaking. We were able to look at all the data, and we have no issues whatsoever. We asked that the commission adopt the maps as proposed, including the bald eagle. I don't think you need to add in one more bald eagle nest at the last minute. That's just would set a precedent. We need to have these things be pretty perfunctory. The best available work's been done. The CPW and the operators, they know how to collaborate and work on issues that come up that may or may not be mapped, and they will anyway. So I'd ask you to just adopt the maps as is. And I think that's about all we have for you today. Let's keep it brief. And we ask you to not allow anything be added to the rulemaking other than what's been proposed for adoption today by the state.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. Questions for Mr. Nguyen? All right, we will let you go and hope you stick around in case we have questions toward the end. And now we will turn to the Colorado Oil and Gas Association.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Mimi Larson with the law firm Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, appearing on behalf of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I would like to begin by thanking Brian McGee and all of the CPW staff who worked on the preparation of the 2025 High Priority Habitat Map rulemaking. COGA especially appreciates CPW's continued efforts to make the development of these maps more transparent and their outreach to affected stakeholders. Commissioners, as you read in COGA's pre-hearing statement and in its response, it takes no issue with the high priority habitat maps proposed for adoption. As you know, no party to this rulemaking opposes CPW's proposed maps. COGA strongly urges the Commission to adopt the proposed maps and the statement of basis and specific purpose without any amendments. COGA further asks the Commission to adhere to the narrow focus of the notice of rulemaking and decline requests seeking changes or additions to the current rules governing wildlife protection. Finally, COGA would like to thank ECMC staff for all their efforts in this rulemaking as well. That concludes my comments, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Questions for the witness? Again, seeing no questions, hope you stick around in case we have questions toward the end. Thank you for the presentation. We now will turn to API Colorado.
Good morning, Chair Robbins. Can you hear me?
We can. Good morning, Mr. Warren.
Good morning, Chair Robbins. Commissioners, I apologize. As I was transitioning to a panelist, you blacked out. So I was hoping you were introducing me. Jim Martin from Beatty Wozniak, representing API Colorado. Again, good morning. API Colorado takes no position on this rulemaking, and we have no presentation on direct. We'll reserve whatever time we might have on rebuttal in the unlikely event rebuttal is necessary. And with that, Mr. Chair, happy to take any questions there might be, and look forward to working with you on this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Any questions? All right. That is the smallest amount of attorneying done to date. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Chair Robbins.
We now will turn to the Energy Council.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Robbins and Commissioners. My name is Michelina Pollock. I serve as the Executive Director of the Energy Council, a nonprofit trade organization committed to promoting safe and environmentally responsible natural gas development here in Southwest Colorado and Northwest New Mexico, particularly in the San Juan Basin. Our members include small family-owned operators and some mid-sized companies who are deeply invested in the communities where they live and work. Before I would begin, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the ECMC and CPW, specifically Mr. McGee and Mr. Archuleta, for their dedication and hard work on the high priority habitat mapping process here in the Southwest Quadrant. Your commitment to data-driven decision-making and stakeholder engagement is critical to ensuring that conservation objectives and responsible energy development can coexist. The Energy Council does support and agree to adopt the HPH maps as proposed in this rulemaking process. However, we did see some opportunities to improve future updates to ensure they support conservation goals while maintaining regulatory predictability for operators. Our recommendations focus on the jurisdictional coordination, regulatory clarity, and long-term stability to make the process more effective and balanced moving forward. One of our primary concerns that I will bring to attention to today is the impact of high priority habitat designations adjacent to tribal lands, particularly those of the Southern Ute Indian tribe. These designations, while well-intended, could inadvertently affect tribal economic development, self-governance, self-determination, and resource management. I'm merely just trying to improve future updates with these recommendations. So mandating tribal consultation in Rule 1202. These future rulemaking should require early engagement with tribal governments before imposing the HBH designations near tribal lands, ensuring that the tribe has insight and land use planning that are fully considered. I would recommend that we establish intergovernmental agreements, so a formal process for the collaboration between the ECMC and tribal governments can enhance the coordination and transparency in the HBH designations near tribal boundaries. Acknowledging tribal authority over mitigation efforts, so any future mitigation frameworks should be developed in partnership with tribal leadership and their designated wildlife division to ensure they respect tribal sovereignty and existing conservation strategies. Once again, I want to thank the ECMC and CPW for your dedication and thoughtful approach to this rulemaking. The Energy Council again supports and agrees to adopt the HBH maps as proposed, but believes that our recommendations can help improve in the future updates, ensuring they are transparent, data-driven, and balanced between conservation priorities and responsible resource development. We look forward to continued collaboration with the Commission, CPW, and all stakeholders to develop policies that support both environmental stewardship and economic sustainability in Colorado. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Questions for the witness? All right, seeing no questions, we thank you for the time and the presentation today on behalf of the Energy Council.
Thank you.
Would like to call upon Mr. McGee to revisualize and in particular, Mr. McGee, we heard some comments from folks. Appreciate all the comments. In particular, would like to ask you if you could respond to the city and county of Broomfield and the issue relative around the eagle on maps that are actually, we're dealing with Southwest maps today, not Broomfield oriented maps, but dealing with that and dealing with the other methods within which we can take into account specific raptors that may not be on a map. And then if you have any comments relevant to the Energy Council comments on tribal consultation, et cetera. Those are at least my two areas, but you're free to opine in any area that you like.
Sure. Yeah. Just thanks for that question, Commissioner Robbins, and appreciate Mrs. Gilbert's testimony from City of Broomfield. The reality is with the nest in question in Broomfield is that nest was destroyed in calendar year 2024. And that nest was visited, that site was visited 12 different times between January 7th, 2024 and June 25th, 2024. And there was no eagle activity. And so that nest came off of the maps because it was destroyed. And so the unfortunate part about here is City of Broomfield missed it by a couple of days in terms of documenting eagle activity for us to change the maps. We don't dispute that there is a new eagle nest there, but the timeline in which we went to the notice, there was no nest there that we knew about or that anyone knew about. And then there was, we found out about that nest in early 2025, which is a new nest. And so I think that is a key clarification, is that in our records now, the old Broomfield nest is destroyed, and this is a new record of a new nest, and they're about 75 feet apart. So while they're in the same general location, they're not the same nest. And so the maps before you today reflect what we knew about in calendar year 2024. And so now there's a new nest. I will venture to guess that this new nest that City of Broomfield has brought to our attention is not the only example on a statewide basis of new nests being developed or built by raptors. This is what they do. This is the breeding season. They're establishing new territories. And so, again, your regulations allow us to account for that should an operator want to develop, in calendar year 25, we know about that nest, and we can use the appropriate consultation on-ramps to address that. I think the other thing that's important to remember as well is that there are likely nests on our proposed map updates that could have been destroyed that are circles on the map today. And so the point that I'm making there is that we're always there's always a lag time, a year behind in breeding season, and we use those on and off ramps for the benefit of species conservation and for the benefit of operators. If those resources don't exist, they can still go through permitting. And so we're comfortable with that approach and not amending the maps just because we didn't know about it within a few days of that notice piece. Is there any more questions on that topic that you would like me to elaborate on, Chair Robbins?
Just to clarify and confirm, but you're comfortable that the regulatory relationship that CPW has with ECMC on this point does a good job of identifying on a site-specific basis the, I don't want to call it temporal, but the fact that the raptors may move around and nests may move. And so even if it's not on a high priority habitat map, there is an opportunity to identify on an OGDP or comprehensive area plan basis things that may have shifted or changed so that we're being protective.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. And I think the other thing to point out too is, while it was raised by Ms. Gilbert about the pending litigation, the commission, you guys supported the on the ground conditions that there was in fact a nest there, even though it wasn't on the map, and didn't approve that location. So I think, again, that the record supports that the regulations work and that the commission is supportive of protecting wildlife resources where they exist in real time. And so, again, we're comfortable with that.
Great. Commissioner Oath has a question for you on this topic.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, thanks so much for that. Two things. One, if the city and county of Broomfield had come to you, a couple of days before, and would this location have been included in the maps that you proposed?
I think if we would have, we could have, the process was great, right? City of Broomfield did nothing wrong. Okay. Yeah. So they identified a resource, they checked the maps, they contacted CPW, we went out and verified it. All of that's good. Really what we've had this misstep is just in terms of timing. And so, had we documented nest activity, that there was a new nest at this site, even, prior to the notice, we would have amended the map to include that location because it's a new nest. But we just missed it in terms of it's just a missing in timing. And so that's why we said we would incorporate it. It's in our records. It's in our internal database. And should that nest persist in calendar year 25, it will be on our proposed updates to the commission next year.
Okay, thank you. And then last one is, it sounds like the commission has not in the past made modifications to the proposed maps, and that this is kind of a different scenario. If the commission were to do so, what does that look like for CPW in terms of challenges or being able to implement that?
I mean, I think logistically it's super challenging. I don't know how we would um, handle the potential infinite number of stakeholders that would show up to say, we want you to look at something, during a rulemaking process. Like, we verified this location, but we do get reports, and we have had that in past rulemakings where stakeholders have brought a list of what they think are potential nest sites that we haven't been able to verify. And so I think the risk for the commission is,
despite having been the youngest to make China's national team at age 15, Glenn.
I think that the risk is if you take and adopt and amend the maps to include this nest in future rulemakings, how will we ever be able to sort out all of the other sort of data that people are submitting during rulemaking? We're trying to get that in, front loaded, where stakeholders can bring us data or locations at any time of the year, but at some point we have to cut it off and say, this is the package that we're going forward to go to rulemaking. And so from my standpoint, I think it would be logistically challenging and maybe practically impossible to consider new data and new locations during rulemaking.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Further questions on this topic? Further questions on other topics for Mr. McGee? Commissioner Ray.
Thank you, Chair Robbins, and thank you, Mr. McGee, for the presentation and for CPW's work on this. We've heard from stakeholders about concerns related to tribal engagement as part of this process. And I know in your presentation, you discussed how CPW engaged with tribes as part of the map development process. I'm hoping you can remind me how and when CPW engaged with tribes, and particularly whether tribes identified any process concerns as part of that engagement.
Yeah, thanks for that, Assistant Director Ray. So, CPW has a long history of working with the tribes, in terms of wildlife management that I already previously discussed. But I think that the key piece of that is that coordination collaboration persists whether there's a regulatory framework for wildlife maps or not. So we have that shared responsibility of wildlife management. The tribe has sovereignty in the management of their own wildlife resources on their tribal lands, and the state respects their management of wildlife when it's on tribal lands. There is a need to coordinate that stuff. One of the ways in which we collaborate with the tribe is that communication of where these resources exist in terms of within the exterior boundaries of the reservation. So you have intermixed fee, federal, and tribal land patchwork in the San Juan Basin. And so it doesn't make sense to try to map wildlife use of the landscape based on jurisdictional boundaries. And so we don't do that. So we map where the wildlife are, irrespective of whose land it is. The tribe uses our maps, and a lot of consultants use our maps when they're doing their NEPA based on whatever activity that the tribe wants to do. Those are reference maps that the tribe can choose to use in terms of our SAM maps and HPH maps, but they're not required to do anything with those maps. They can ignore them if they want. So again, there's no operational or jurisdictional conflict in our view with wildlife resources that we map and tribal sovereignty or tribal operations. We routinely talk to the biologists, the tribal wildlife departments. And again, we have jointly funded studies of capturing and collaring animals whose data that we share go into making these maps. And so that's happened in the past, and it's currently happening right now. We just finished collaring about 40 mule deer with the Southern Ute tribe about 3 weeks ago.
Mr. Chair, if I could follow up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McGee. And I appreciate you describing sort of the robust ongoing coordination that happens. It's really helpful to know that that's happening. Specifically with regard to this rulemaking, when you were having conversations about the new map updates, did the tribes or their representatives raise any concerns about what was being proposed or how it would be incorporated into ECMC's rulemaking process?
No, not that CPW heard of any concern on the stuff. We sent them a letter in early November, so it's talking about the process and talking about that these maps would eventually end up in a rulemaking with ECMC, and then we had an in-person meeting with tribal staff from the wildlife departments, and no issues were raised with the maps or any sort of jurisdictional conflicts.
Thank you.
Further questions of Mr. McGee from Colorado Parks and Wildlife? Well, thank you again for being with us and for sharing the thoughts and the processes that helped develop the HPH maps that are before us for consideration.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, that concludes the party presentations. I checked in with Hearings Manager Thomas, and staff of ECMC does not have anything further to add. So unless we have questions of them, we would move, I think, at this point into deliberations. Does any commissioner desire to start with deliberations on the HPH rulemaking? Very appropriate. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my fellow commissioners for the opportunity to lead off here. First, it's been said a number of times today, but I wanted to say once again, thank you to all involved for the significant work done. There's been many skilled professionals on many fronts, not just with CPW, not just with ECMC, but with NGOs, with local governments, with the industry that have participated, not just in this rulemaking, but in the original regulations associated with this rulemaking that came forth from mission change, and with each with improvement of this process with each high priority habitat rulemaking that's taken place pursuant to that mission change rulemaking. I also appreciate this being brought to us in what I think is a very timely manner. I know that many members of staff and Director Murphy helped to lead on that, and I think that this is a very appropriate timeline. As you've heard me say a number of times, that it's important that we do this in a timely manner each year. As demonstrated by CPW's presentation and the discussion here today, wildlife are messy. They're not always cooperative or compliant with our processes, and it's not a simple or easy process to keep wildlife maps up to date. I appreciate that we've developed a protocol, that CPW has developed a protocol, and one that I think is good in order to do their best to keep their arms around what wildlife are doing in this state. I also appreciate the many partners that work with CPW, and part of that process, although it was part of the process that fell a little short this year, was demonstrated here today how that process works between partners. I'm really, really proud of Colorado's work to protect wildlife. My career's been dedicated to it, and I think true conservation really requires buy-in by all parties. And CPW's worked tirelessly with ECMC to ensure that energy development takes place in a manner that is sustainable and that is the most beneficial possible for wildlife. Again, as demonstrated by the work we saw briefly here today. We didn't see similar wildlife presentations from local governments today, but many of them throughout Colorado have wildlife programs, and they employ full-time efforts to also work towards protection of wildlife. And I particularly appreciate Broomfield's attention to this effort today and desire to protect wildlife, and share their disappointment that this Nest was not able to make it into the updates as per timing this year and timing alone. That said, I agree with CPW that that differentiation from their mapping processes does introduce significant potential difficulties that really lead us back to a conservation environment that would be more akin to our approach post 1298, as mentioned by Mr. McGee, than the approved approach that we've adopted pursuant to the mission change rulemaking. I think consistency with CPW habitat maps and processes is the most effective way for us and really for all constituents to cooperate in a reasonable manner in our joint statutory missions to protect wildlife. And I do continue to encourage all parties to collaborate with CPW and participate in their processes. Just to make clear that point there, I believe that we should allow status quo for this nest as was presented by CPW today and allow it to join through the new nest process next year. We also didn't see similar presentations today from NGOs, although we heard briefly, but there are many throughout Colorado whose purposes, their resources, their efforts are closely tied to wildlife conservation, and they work tirelessly to do so. And it's demonstrated in their participation in many processes, such as the one we've had here today or having here today. I also appreciate the Energy Council's testimony and thoughts, and I do encourage them to continue to work with CPW on suggesting improvements to the process. Certainly, industry and others have continued to suggest improvements to CPW's process, and particularly their stakeholder and outreach processes. And many of those have been incorporated, and we've seen things go increasingly smoother, and appreciate those efforts today. So I encourage them to continue to work procedurally with CPW. And finally, we didn't see any presentations today either from operators or from industry groups, but many of those also include full-time employees to incorporate wildlife conservation and programs into their business models. And admittedly, these annual updates create dynamics that are difficult sometimes for operators, and industry nonetheless continues to be supportive of efforts to protect wildlife while responsibly highlighting challenges and opportunities for improvement. They've stood today in support of these regulations as well, or of this adoption of these regulations as well, or these maps, excuse me. You know, all of these organizations and individuals have worked very hard to bring us the process that we've got here today. I'm supportive of it. I want to individually thank each of them for their work. And, you know, we've heard today and other days ongoing concerns and issues and suggested approaches and proposed solutions. We've never heard an implied assertion that any party doesn't share Colorado's vision of ensuring the conservation and perpetuation of wildlife. I believe the process that we have here today has constituted a significant improvement to the protection of wildlife over past years. I'm supportive of continuing to use the process that's been outlined by CPW. I believe that CPW's maps do reflect the best available science associated with the best available process for updating these maps on an annual basis. I thank everybody for their efforts. The process is working, in my opinion, because of these efforts. The only disagreement I had with Mr. McGee today is when he said it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. I think it's not perfect, but it's very good. I really am, as you can tell, very much behind the work that we're doing to protect wildlife. So that said, Mr. Chair, I don't want to shortchange discussion by my fellow commissioners, but I certainly am willing and would like to propose a motion to adopt these HPH maps into our regulations as presented.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ackerman. I really appreciate you leading off on deliberations. I'm in agreement with all the things that you said. Other deliberative thoughts from commissioners? Commissioner Oath and then Commissioner Messner.
Thank you. And thanks, Commissioner Ackerman, for all of your thoughtful comments. Really appreciate your perspective and agree with many of the things that you said. I do have some comments specifically about, you know, the one particular site raised by Broomfield, and I think see that just a little bit differently. You know, but first do want to say that I really appreciate, you know, the process that CPW has put together and went through in this case, and it sounds like in many others, but it has improved over time, it sounds like, and so has, a process that has really great transparency that, therefore led to this great amount of consensus and accuracy. It's really commendable, and something to, make sure that we don't do anything to compromise that. That said, in my book, this is an administrative process, and we should be open to, further ensuring the accuracy of maps, and would just feel that it would be a shame that because this site was raised just a couple of days late, but still well within an administrative process where, this body is considering comments and able to make changes to it, that we didn't take that into account. And particularly in this case, I think, it seems like everyone is in agreement that, Broomfield was acting in good faith here, and did everything right. And so, think that we probably should make sure that the maps are as clear as possible. I'm sensitive to Mr. McGee's testimony and concern about, a future process that if suddenly there were, because there may be other nests that, we don't want a process where we have many stakeholders who don't participate early in the process, right? I mean, and instead wait until this process to bring things up that could create an unwieldy process. And that's certainly not something that I would want to see. I think we could put some things in place if that came to be. But think that, in this case, it is just one site that we do know about. And so I would be in favor of the maps. That said, for those other sites, or if it doesn't happen today, I very much appreciate that the process that this commission has put into place does allow for on-ramps and protection in situations like this, or in other situations where other nests maybe have not come to light, or as Commissioner Ackerman and others have noted, as think circumstances change on the ground, that the process allows for flexibility and to take those kinds of things into account to ensure protection of wildlife resources. So where I am, it would be in favor of just modifying CPW's proposed maps to include that particular site, but otherwise adopt as proposed.
Commissioner Messner?
Thank you. And thank you to my fellow commissioners for their comments. As always, very insightful. So been through a number of these high priority habitat map updates at this point, as well as the process that developed how these high priority habitat maps were to be updated. And I really respect the process that we've gone through in order to develop a system that allows for these maps to be updated on an annual basis. And, I think Mr. McGee and other stakeholders have provided some perspective on the ever evolving wildlife landscape and how to provide the most up-to-date information at a point in time on a map that helps us do in our decision making around how to ensure that we're protecting wildlife in our processes. I appreciate Mr. McGee going through the significant stakeholder processes that are involved with each of the high priority habitat map updates, and the continual evolution of those stakeholder processes and how they develop these high priority habitat areas throughout the state. And I'm proud that the state is serious about its protection of wildlife, as are each of the commissioners on this commission. I do think we have to respect this process that has been well vetted through the mission change rulemaking, rather than making wholesale changes. And I know that wholesale changes are not being contemplated here, but I do worry about a precedent that may have us facing wholesale proposals for changes to the high priority habitat maps during this rulemaking process. I think that opens a can of worms that would be very, very challenging, and could ultimately lead to less protections for wildlife than the process we have in place right now. And so I do think, from my perspective, I would like to see us continue to respect the process. I think there are clear protections in place in a number of rules that contemplate this scenario that Broomfield has brought up. And I think those rules include Rule 301, Rule 303, Rule 307, Rule 309. I'm give you just a couple of highlights of how I think that these do address this, through our process as we review OGDPs or CAPs. 301A indicates that the commissioner director may require any conditions of approval that are determined to be necessary and reasonable to protect and minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. In the statement of basis and purpose, page 53, it indicates that although many provisions of the act are relevant to permit applications, the director or commission may deny a permit application in any circumstance where a permit application even meets the criteria of the commission rules, but does not protect and minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources as contemplated by statute. Rule 301E indicates the director of the commission may request any information necessary and reasonable to make a final determination of approval or denial of any permit application before the commission. The statement of basis and purpose, page 54, indicates that in codifying the longstanding practice that the commission and its staff may request additional information from operators when necessary for the commission to determine whether to approve or deny a permit or to satisfy the informational requirements of the application. In Rule 303, it indicates that the director may ask for any other relevant information that is reasonable and necessary to determine whether a proposed operation meets the commission's rules and protects and minimizes adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. Rule 307, which lines out how the commission considers the director's recommendation. There's a number of elements in there around denial or stays of application that contemplate additional information or further analysis or additional consultations before we make a determination whether it's protective or not. The Rule 309, specifically contemplates situations where these consultations need to happen with CPW associated with impacts to wildlife that are not necessarily part of high priority habitats. And so, that to me is a really important piece, particularly in Rule 309E. And the statement of basis and purpose, page 171, it indicates that there may be circumstances where a Form 2A oil and gas development plan or comprehensive area plan deemed complete may warrant reevaluation by the commission in order to confirm with current and relevant high priority habitat data, which will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis as appropriate in consultation with the operator and CPW. And then further on page 175 of the statement of basis and purpose, the commission included the term other matter in Rule 309E2D to include consultations where the facts on the ground identify a wildlife resource that needs consideration. Here, CPW can request a consultation where appropriate. It is important to note that this on-ramp to consultation is not limited to species and habitats identified specifically in the rules or referenced by a broader defined term of high priority habitat. There must be only a nexus to wildlife resources as defined in the 100 series rules in order for Rule 301E2D to apply. Examples that maybe fall under Rule 309E2D include, but are not limited to, situations in which CPW is notified of an active raptor nest site that does not appear on the most recent high priority habitat maps provided to the commission, or where CPW is aware of a known big game migration corridor, including pinch points and stopover areas that do not currently appear on the high priority habitat maps. I think these are good examples in the rules on how we contemplated this during the mission change rulemaking and how we apply these rules to situations where there may be an potential impact associated to wildlife that are not within high priority habitat areas. I think that we've applied these to our decision making on OGDPs and cap reviews in the past, and I don't see any reason why we would not continue to do that. I do think at different time applicants have argued that the requirements may only be applied voluntarily. I think we've not agreed with that, and I want to be clear that the rules that I've indicated here do not indicate that it is a voluntary decision by an applicant, but this is rather if a species or habitat could be affected irregardless of high priority habitat maps, then the commission has the authority to impose requirements or even deny applications based on consultation with CPW or other relevant findings. And so with all of that, and I know I was long-winded, but I wanted to make sure I made a clear record of why I'm making this decision, but I'm comfortable with the high priority habitat maps as they're being presented here and acknowledge Broomfield's concerns, but think we have a process in place in order to be able to address those as long as we continue to follow our rules in our process.
Thank you for those deliberative thoughts, Commissioner Cross.
Chair, and thank you to my fellow commissioners for off and for your points.
Commissioner Cross, we can't hear you.
Commissioner Ackerman.
You're still kind of muted, unfortunately.
Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I'll just be brief. I do want to reiterate the appreciation for the work done on these high priority habitat maps. I want to thank the stakeholders for their participation. But I do agree with Commissioner Ackerman and with Commissioner Messner and with CPW. I do think that we do have protections available for when nests are found. And, given that we do have the ability to and have the history of showing that we have protected nests like this, I don't have great concern that it is not on the map at this time. I think we've seen that, for example, with the Washington pad that we had in 2024. And so I am okay with the maps as they are. And again, appreciate the hard work done on this, but I'm in favor of the proposed habitat maps as presented.
Commissioner Ray.
Thank you, Chair Robbins, and thanks to my fellow commissioners for their comments. I also want to thank ECMC and CPW staff for their work preparing for the annual HPH rulemaking. And in particular, on behalf of the department, want to recognize the wildlife experts at CPW who gather the data and information to update these HPH maps that form the basis for this commission's work to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts to wildlife from energy development. I'll also note, as Brian did, that these maps form the basis for informed land use decisions in many other contexts around the state. And so it's critical work that CPW performs. I also want to recognize the extensive public and stakeholder engagement that CPW and ECMC staff conducted as part of this rulemaking. I do have a couple of deliberative comments related to some of the issues that have been raised by other commissioners. First, I support CPW's position to proceed with the maps as noticed in the rulemaking. As CPW staff noted, there's an unavoidable lag between when data is collected, verified, updated on the maps, and then when these rules are adopted. So there'll always be an administrative need to choose some point in time to finalize those maps for adoption by this commission. And as we've heard, CPW and ECMC have, in my opinion, sufficient tools to address newly discovered nests or other changed conditions after the adoption of the maps. The other thing I want to respond to is the pre-hearing statements related to engagement with tribal governments. The department values the state's government-to-government relationship with Colorado's federally recognized tribes. And it's important to note that ECMC does not have jurisdiction on tribal land, and these rules do not apply to Indian lands and minerals or to the Southern Ute Indian tribe within the exterior boundaries of the Southern Ute Indian Reservation. We'll also note that we heard from CPW about their proactive engagement with the tribes as part of this rulemaking process, which I appreciate. But I do want to articulate that the department would welcome the opportunity to engage directly with the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain tribal governments on how those tribes can participate in future rulemaking processes. And I'd be happy to work with DNR's Assistant Director for Tribal Affairs to facilitate that engagement. So it's a critical issue. I think that engagement was done well in this context, but we're always interested in trying to improve those relationships and ensure that tribal governments have the opportunity to engage with all of DNR's divisions. So I'd be happy to help ensure that that is happening in the future. With that, I encourage my fellow commissioners to adopt the maps as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ray, for the deliberative comments from the Department of Natural Resources. Really appreciate that. Further deliberations? Commissioner Ackerman, do you want to make a motion?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity, and with great respect to Commissioner Oath, my original motion thoughts stand, and I would make a motion to adopt the maps as presented by CPW.
We have a motion. We have a second. Is there further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The HPH maps as presented are adopted. With that, commissioners, I believe that concludes the business of today. We have a busy rest of the week. We start tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. on the produced water rulemaking. Encourage everyone to attend and present to us on that important topic as well. With that, I would move to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll see everybody tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for produced water rulemaking.